Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing well, busy getting ready for Christmas. And how are you doing? Do you have all your presents bought? Or are you all set?
Well, working on it. By the time this airs, hopefully it'll all be done, and they will all be together and wrapped and maybe even opened.
And this is a good time to wish all of our listeners a wonderful holiday season.
Yeah. Hopefully everybody's staying warm because we've had some cold weather lately.
We have. And I'm appreciative for the snow that we've had that we got before the cold weather. And one thing that was nice, we got some warm weather on the snow before the cold weather and the windy weather because it formed kind of a crust on the snow. So it didn't all blow off of my iris. I always worry about our iris because they're so shallowly rooted that if we get too much freezing, thawing, they can just pop right out of the ground. So I'm happy that we have some good snow cover. So the glass is half full, I guess. And so, but I don't appreciate the cold myself.
No, it's tough, but we're going to talk about gardening. So we're going to try to take our mind off that. And we're going to, we should say too, here at the beginning, we're going to take a couple weeks off here over the holiday season. So actually by the next time, Don, that we meet and we're talking, the days will be getting longer.
Yes.
Let's look forward to that. The days will be getting longer. We'll start seeing more sunlight. We won't really notice it for a while yet, but it's coming.
And it's going to be fun. Today, we're going to talk about some New Year's resolutions for gardeners. Yes. And so we're already thinking about next spring.
Do you keep a list of resolutions to make every year?
I do not.
I
have them in my head.
Yep.
I don't make a list, except I have written garden columns about it. So I guess that kind of puts my feet to the fire to live up to my written expectations. And but I always have these in the back of my mind. And so it's going to be fun today to kind of formalize some of these resolutions for gardening.
Yeah, it'll be good to hear about it. But first, before we get into that, you've got a letter from a listener.
I do. Shirley wrote in. She says, "Morning, Don and John. What is included in the mix of soil or slurry when getting plants to root? You shared it on a Zoom cast, and my prayer plant thrives in it. Hope all's well with you and your families. Thanks." From Shirley. Thank you very much, Shirley, for writing in, and thanks to everyone who does write in. And so now Shirley's mentioning that I did a Zoom webinar on starting plants from cuttings. It was particularly on houseplant cuttings, so a seminar that I did a year ago. And in that, I'm sure she's referring to the mix that I suggested for rooting plants in. Okay, you can take a houseplant cutting and just put it in a glass of water, okay, and it'll root, but the roots that they form in water are not the best. They're not adapted to a solid medium. They're like water-type roots, okay, and so we can get a better root system on a houseplant cutting if we root them in a more solid type media instead of water. Okay, so what I had suggested was vermiculite. Mm-hmm. Now, vermiculite are the little golden flakes. You can buy it. Garden centers, many hardware stores in their plant section have bags of vermiculite. It's a very dry material. And so you do need to wet it beforehand before using. Otherwise, it's kind of dry and dusty. But the cutting method that I had suggested was what I call the ice cream bucket of houseplant cuttings. Okay, you create a little greenhouse in an old ice cream bucket, and you fill it about half full of vermiculite, wet it down really good, and then you put your cuttings in that. It closes in a plastic bag, makes a little greenhouse, and they root beautifully in that. So I get a kick out of when, Shirley, when you mentioned the mix of soil and slurry. I guess I haven't heard it called a slurry, but I think what I mentioned was that you can use the vermiculite straight or mix it about half and half vermiculite and a high-quality potting mix. And so I believe that's what she's referring to, kind of the mix there. And she indicates that her prayer plant thrived in it. So not only did it root well, but it sounds like she's maybe using that to grow. That mix by itself to grow on a houseplant is maybe a little almost too airy. vermiculite has a really good drainage, and prayer plants like that. So when you take cuttings out of that mix, you might then go with a little heavier blend of the regular potting mix, maybe with some vermiculite added to it. Many potting mixes have that. You can see the little flakes of golden vermiculite in it. So again, thank you, Shirley, and I'm glad the prayer plant is doing well. I think the vermiculite, not only did it root well in it, but that adds really good drainage, which prayer plants like. Are you familiar with prayer plant, John?
I don't think so. I probably would recognize them.
Yeah, I know you would. And where it gets its name is at night in kind of the dark, the leaves fold up slightly as in prayer. So that's where it gets the name prayer plant. Well, thank you again, Shirley. Interesting discussion. And anyone who would like to send in a question, comment, successes, maybe something that's not such a success, send us an email, donald.kinsler, KINZLER, @ndsu.edu.
Well, that's great. And, hearing about that makes me think like, well, maybe that's something I can do. And maybe that's something I can add to my New Year's resolution list, which we're going to talk about today. The things that we as gardeners, that we maybe sometimes that we recognize we need to do a better job of this, or we didn't do a good job of this in the past. In my case, that's often what happens. Or maybe for some of us, it's things that we resolve to do in the new year, things that we're going to do that maybe we want to try something different. Where were you you said you don't really keep a New Year's resolution list, but for the purpose of the show, we thought that we would try something.
Yeah, actually get them down on paper here. And
so what's the top of your list? The
top of my list is to spend 10 minutes a day during the growing season. Spend 10 minutes a day simply walking through the yard and garden, not only enjoying the flowers and vegetables and seeing how things are growing, but bending down to pull a few weeds. It's interesting. Now on the landscape around our house, it's got mulch and everything, but I'll oftentimes see a weed popping up or maybe a little volunteer tree seedling popping up. And if I take 10 minutes in the evening just to walk around, and it also gets you to enjoy and see how things are growing. But it's amazing how many weeds you'll see popping up. And if you just stop and pop some of those out, just 10 minutes a day walking around, then I can prevent that little elm seedling that's just appearing from becoming a tree popping out of my dogwood in the future. And so it's surprising how just a few minutes a day can make a big difference. And so I am going to purposely do that. That's at the top of my list, to spend just that few minutes going around. 10 minutes isn't too long, but you can get a lot done in that.
Well, and like you said, that's another way just to kind of force yourself to take some time, be outside, and not necessarily have a big to-do list, but you're able to appreciate the space that you have a little bit more that way.
Exactly. I'll probably take along my hori knife, my gardening knife, just so that I've got a weeding tool in hand. So when I go around, and so again, that's going to be the top of my list. Going to weed the vegetable garden, that takes a dedicated time to go out and do that. But I'm going to spend those 10 minutes. I think they're going to be valuable because I've kind of done that in the past, and so I know how important it is. So what is at the top of your list, John?
Well, it has to do with weeds as well too, but I am going to be determined to get my mulch down earlier this year. I didn't get it down early enough last year, and in some areas I never got it down at all. And so the two things about mulch, well, there's a number of things about mulch. We've talked about this before. It's a good weed suppression, but also it kind of helps it kind of evens out the area that's kind of creates this blank space around your plants to really let your plants pop a lot more. We use a black shredded wood mulch, and we think that that's just really helps things. The colors stand out a lot more. It's because it's already dark. It's not going to get any darker with rain or aging or anything like that. And also by doing it earlier in the year, that's when you can find the really good deals. That the things are on sale early in the year.
Truth.
Mulch is on sale, and it's just going to get more expensive later in the year. So I'm going to be determined to, go out. I don't have a pickup, so I'll be having to take a number of trips with my Subaru wagon to load up with mulch, and hopefully it doesn't bring down the back end too much. But do that and really get that down, because I think that way going forward, you start with that weed suppression, and you're already setting it up. It looks nice to begin with. It looks tidy to begin with, and as things pop up, and as you can plant around them, you can pull them you could make little areas to dig
exactly.
around the mulch.
And weeds pull out a lot easier. Any weeds that do sprout in the mulch or coming up kind of through the mulch, weeds do pull out a lot easier from mulch. And I'm encouraged by the trend over the last number of years to use more mulch, because it's interesting. Empty, blank soil is just not natural. Like the space between perennials, just having bare ground. That's not natural. And more soil scientists have emphasized this, that in nature, you do not see bare soil. In a forest, there's leaves that are creating the mulch. Maybe the only spot you see bare is in a desert where nothing's growing.
Right.
Otherwise, things just natural. The prairie was covered with grass and old grass and everything. And so having bare soil in between plants, for example, perennials, just isn't natural. It's not a good thing for soil. And so I love that, getting the soil covered early in the season. I think that's a great one.
Yeah. How about you? What's another one high on your list?
Oh, kind of along with the weeding is in the vegetable garden, getting the weeds when they're tiny.
Yep.
Now, I've got my dad's old rototiller that he bought, I think, in early 1970s. Okay, so the thing's 50-some years old. It runs beautifully. I enjoy rototilling with it. So I rototill in the fall, rototill in the spring. And so a lot of my vegetable garden then, as I plant it, in between the rows is blank soil. Okay. And so I try to get the weeds when they're tiny. But one thing on my to-do list is, we just discussed how bare soil isn't natural. I want to transition more to not having exposed soil in my vegetable garden. So maybe that is mulching with lawn clippings. Mm-hmm. Collecting the lawn clippings and putting those onto the vegetable garden, or saving leaves and putting leaf mulch, kind of crunching those up nice, wetting them down so they don't blow away, and covering that soil in between. I still am going to enjoy rototilling in the spring, but I'm going to, like you say, in my own vegetable garden, I'm going to get that soil covered earlier. And that will help suppress the weeds, because keeping the weeds out of the vegetable garden is number 2 on my list. And there's nothing more downheartening. Is that a word? Downheartening?
Yeah,
disheartening?
I think so, sure. Disheartening.
Disheartening than going out into your vegetable garden as everything is just coming up and you can't even see where anything is because the weeds are growing faster than vegetables are. And so keeping control of the weeds from the very start, that's got to be my number 2 on the list.
Yeah, and the thing with that too is that you already feel like you're accomplishing something, getting out ahead of the game, and both of these things too. What we're doing is that we're doing things that will benefit the soil itself.
Oh, definitely.
It's not just about that weeds are ugly, but by putting things on the soil that will help break down and will help feed the soil. That's all really good. What's another one on your list?
Okay, another one closely related, and that is on the invasive, persistent perennial weeds, such as quackgrass, Canada thistle, creeping Charlie, creeping Jenny, all of those, is really attacking them. Now, maybe it's smothering them. So some of those will pop through mulch really easily. So on spots where there is Canada thistle and quackgrass, making sure that I put an underlayment that gives a little more teeth, such as my cardboard. So that can even be done in the vegetable garden. If you've got areas where thistles are coming up, like in between the rows, maybe laying down a cardboard layer and then putting mulch on top so that the cardboard stays in place. But in spots where there are those persistent weeds, maybe using some cardboard under the mulch. The cardboard's going to decay and add just good organic material down into that. And in the perennial garden also, attacking the thistles and quackgrass. And when I say attacking, okay, I've already got mulch, cardboard, and things like that. But where the thistles, they'll find their way through a little crack somewhere. And so I'm a big proponent of just spot spraying. And maybe it's taking an old detergent bottle with a squirt top, mixing up a little glyphosate, and just putting a little bit in the central growing point of that thistle, which is quite effective. And so if you can gradually, I'm not going to defeat those in one growing season, but if I keep on it, I can get ahead of these things. If I do nothing, those weeds are going to just, they aren't going to get rid of themselves.
No.
They're going to keep.
They're going to dig in.
So eliminating or at least keeping on the battle of those invasive weeds, that's high on my list. Oh, another one closely related is on weeds that go to seed. Okay, purslane. Are you familiar with purslane? Yep. The low growing, it's got kind of that fleshy reddish green. You can eat it. It's wonderful, edible. But a little of that goes a long way. It shoots its seeds all over the garden. And so I'm going to make sure I do not let purslane go to seed. Now I know it can the seed can stay in your soil for, I think it's been documented, 40 years probably, and they'll shoot seed all over the place. And so I know I have a bank of seed in the soil. But if I can prevent more adding to it, eventually maybe it'll take me 40 years before that seed will run out of the soil. But anyway, I'm going to try to eliminate any of those weeds from going to seed. Even, at the edges of a garden, have you seen a Canada thistle go to seed? The big fluffy seed that's if that's allowed to seed, it's floating all over the place. And of course, if that gets seeded in, of course, that's a perennial. It'll be all over the place then. So weed control is high on my list. And how about you? Do you have another one? Well, you're going to work on.
You brought up something that is on my list, and it was on my to-do list for this past year, and I didn't get around to it. When you've been to our yard, it's a relatively small yard, and we decided to designate a certain amount of that space to a vegetable garden. So I put in a fence this year to keep the dogs out and other critters maybe. And we have a couple raised beds in there. And one thing that we wanted to do was put cardboard down all around it so that we wouldn't have to worry about grass, wouldn't have to worry about weeds back there too. We didn't really get around to, we did it in an area, and then, after a period of time, it rained and it wore down. I have been collecting boxes or holding on to bigger boxes, including some Christmas gift boxes now, things that were delivered in, good plain brown cardboard boxes that I intend to get out there when I can and just really put a carpet layer of the cardboard down, and then all the other mulch that I've got, we're going to put on top of that. And so again, like you said, suppressing the weeds, but also again to make an area that looks presentable and it looks nice and it looks clean and cared for.
Yeah, and another one on my list here is heavy clay soil. Okay, now we both garden in the Red River Valley soil. Yeah. It is heavy, gooey clay. I grew up outside the Red River Valley, and when I used to hear garden columnist Dorothy Collins, gosh, I read her every week.
Yep, she was great.
Gosh, and she wrote that garden column for, I think, 50 years or more? Well, anyway, I would hear her or read about her gardening in the Red River Valley heavy clay soil. I thought, well, how bad can it be? Well, then I moved to Fargo, and I know how bad it can be. That heavy clay is gooey. And so amending that soil is an ongoing process because the clay particles, what makes it so gooey and sticky, by amending it with organic matter, we can help those gooey clay particles be less gooey and less sticky. So it's an ongoing process. So it's not like we can amend our soil once there and good for the life of the garden, I'm going to have everything rosy. No, we need to keep on that almost every year. And so on my to-do list for this year is to continue adding organic matter. Now, maybe that's leaves from the fall that are still that I've still got, and I can incorporate it in, adding peat moss, your own compost. I keep a compost area out where we have everything from old vegetable scraps to some of last year's plants, and as that becomes good, I'll add that into the soil in the vegetable garden and the perennials. And also keeping the soil covered, like with mulch and things, that improves the soil also, because as the layer of mulch that is contacting with the soil, that layer eventually degrades, decomposes into good stuff to add to the soil. And that's why, every few years you have to replenish the wood mulch, and that's great because what's decaying next to the soil surface, that is adding good material for microbes and other good organic material to it. So improving the soil I'm going to continue with that because I know really in heavy clay soil, that's an ongoing process. And so that is high on my list as well.
Let's get one more and then we'll take a break.
All right. Another one is new plant combinations.
Oh.
I love annual flowers. And so in both the the containers and the flower beds, I'm going to make sure I try at least 3 new flowers. Okay, now, and maybe other gardeners can relate. Okay, we've all got favorite flowers that they've just done well in our containers or our flower beds, and we know they work well for us in our situation. So sometimes you tend to then plant the same things because they're reliable, it's going to work. And so I'm going to throw caution to the wind, and I'm going to incorporate some new materials. Now, when I say throw caution to the wind, anytime you try something new, it may work out well, maybe it'll be disappointment. But unless you try something new, you won't know that there's something wonderful out there. And, for example, anybody that's tried Vista bubblegum petunia, they're absolutely wonderful. But yet, if you hadn't taken the leap and actually tried that, you wouldn't know how good it was. So I'm going to make sure that I'm just not stuck in a rut planting the same thing I'm going to incorporate some new things, and knock on wood, they may be great improvements over what I've planted in the past.
When you talk about trying something new and taking a little chance, do you, I don't want to say hedge your bets, but do you do something that maybe it won't be like when you were talking about the bubblegum petunias? I like those in a hanging basket right by the garage door. That way when we walk out of the house, it's one of the first things we see. When we walk into the backyard from the side of the house, it's the first thing you see. I would be reluctant to put something there that wasn't quite sure of. That said, we all know we can change things. If something's not going well by the middle of June, you can swap it out.
You can. Although I have to chuckle, John, because, we have kind of by our front walkway leading up to the front porch, we have 2 big concrete planters. They aren't going anywhere. I'm not going to be able to swap those out. So when you say hedge your bets, I am likely going to plant those with things I know are going to do well. I probably won't use those as an experiment because, what if something doesn't turn out? I don't want to have to look at those or have anybody else look at those all summer and see kind of a fizzle. So I'll probably save the new things for something that I can either change out or that will be a little less visible. But, unless we try new things, we don't know what good things are out there.
That's right. All right, let's take a quick little break. When we come back, more of our New Year's resolutions.
Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
All right, we're back, and this week we're talking about our New Year's resolutions, things that we want to do differently, things that we want to try, things that maybe we're going to convince ourselves we don't need to do again in the 2026 gardening season. So what's another one on your list, Don?
African violets. Currently, I do not have an African violet, and I want to get them back. I had about 5 of them a few years ago. They bloomed beautifully, and then I got busy, and I maybe wasn't caring for them the way. I mean, I'll tell that in confidence so that we're only talking to you, me, and a bunch of podcast listeners. So I'll admit, if it won't go any farther, that I actually wasn't caring for those after a few years the way I should have, and they started going downhill. So I disposed of them, but I want to get them back because African violets is such a beautiful blooming plant. And they do well under artificial lights or in a window. And if you give them the care that they want, they just respond so beautifully. And so one of my goals for this year is to get African violets again, maybe, 4 different colors maybe because they're so beautiful, and to give them the care that they need to thrive. So anyway, I've always just felt a little bit of lack that I don't have my African violets anymore, and I want to get them back. Have you guys grown African violets?
No, we don't have we don't have great light for houseplants, and so the windows that we do have access to, I think, are already kind of spoken for. So I'm not sure if we can really do more with houseplants like that. But I would like that would be really nice. What's another one on your list?
Another one on my list is to test the soil in our vegetable garden.
Oh, okay.
Now we moved to this location. Actually, it's been about 9 years, and I got busy, and I have not tested the soil. And so I want to take a soil test. Now, a soil test can be sent to University of Minnesota. Just Google University of Minnesota soil testing. It'll tell you how and where and all that. Or AgVice in Northwood, North Dakota. AgVice, AgVise, AgVice. Google that one. North Dakota State University does not have a soil testing lab currently. But those are 2 good options. I suppose it's in the neighborhood of $20 or so. So it's not prohibitively expensive. But that will tell you kind of what the status of the nutrition in your soil is. And because I haven't done that, I'm overdue. So I need to get in our vegetable garden, and maybe also I'll do one in the perennial garden too, and see what exactly the nutrient level of that soil is. And another one that I'm thinking about is to help our lawn become even more self-sustaining. And when I say self-sustaining, to make sure that when I water it, I'm watering deeply and maybe a little less often. But the other thing I want to do is to incorporate more white Dutch clover into our lawn. I've got some, and Dutch white clover plays well with the existing lawn grass. It stays fairly low, and the 2 blend together. And it's interesting. I've probably mentioned before on podcasts that in the 1930s, 40s, and early 50s, it was considered an elite thing to have clover in your lawn. Clover feeds, it puts nitrogen down in and helps suppress other weeds, and it just works well on the lawn. And the bees love it. But it was kind of when 2,4-D came in, the weed killer, maybe in the late 40s. Then all of a sudden, people could remove some of these things, and 2,4-D started having a depressing effect on clover, and so it kind of fell out. But in the meantime, we're learning more about soil health, lawn health, getting other. We don't need to have a monoculture of bluegrass. So I'm gonna include a little more white clover into my lawn. Now I know you've been working on a clover and kind of a mixed
clover section. Yeah. A bee lawn, I think it's called. Yeah. And it's really nice. And it's also nice too, because it doesn't necessarily take a lot of, it doesn't require as much maintenance as a regular grass lawn does. So it's kind of a nice area. Plus it's nice for the pollinators. You see more activity over there, and it's fun to see.
It is. And speaking of pollinators, another thing on my to-do list is providing a water source for bees.
Yeah.
And so now a water source for bees, the bee people tell us that what is best for them are water-filled trays, somewhat shallow, but filled with pebbles so that the pebbles are extending up above the water level so that bees can kind of land on the pebble and drink. I don't know exactly how bees drink,
right.
but so that they have a little landing pad in the water, and so some pebbles extending up above that. And of course, if we're good to our pollinators, we'll have better apple crops and cucumber crops, and we'll enjoy seeing them on the flowers and things like that as well. So that's on my list to do, my resolutions, is make sure we do that. And now this one's going to sound kind of funny. Some of these resolutions are a little bit here and there, but one that I wrote down was to plant a crop of radishes in the fall. So see, I'm mixing around a little bit from spring to summer to fall, but one thing on my mind was to plant a fall crop of radishes. I've not done that in the past, and having a good crop of radishes that is not woody and that doesn't all grow up into tops and very little radish underneath is always a challenge for many of us. And some of the people that have written back to me have said that the best crop of radishes that they've ever had have been those that are planted in the fall, say maybe late August, early September, and radishes form a radish in about 40 days or so.
Quick growers,
quick growers, 40 days, maybe 50. But anyway, when we plant our radishes in the spring, pretty soon warm weather comes. Mm-hmm. And so that radish is growing oftentimes in warmer weather, unless you plant it maybe in April. And they're forming that radish in heat, and that tends to make the tops grow bigger. Maybe they get a little woody and not as nice and tender and crisp as we would like. So I'm going to this next year, fall of 2026, I'm thinking ahead already, I'm going to plant a fall crop of radishes. And maybe while I'm at it, throw in some lettuce and spinach and some other things.
Yeah, other things that are really pretty quick growers.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I've always heard of how beneficial that is. And this year I'm going to make sure I actually do it. Oh, another thing. I never have enough roses. I like roses. And so I've been intrigued over the last number of years, I don't know, 6 years or so, to see more places offering what are called own root roses, OWNROOT, own root. Okay. Now, that is versus grafted. For decades, roses were propagated by grafting. You take the good flowering part, graft it onto just a kind of a wild rootstock, and that was the only way that they could propagate these beautiful flowering roses. A problem with that is during our winters, if that top part, the grafted part, freezes off, you've lost the good part. All that grows is this kind of nondescript root type thing that doesn't seem to bloom. I've let the roots grow on some of those, and I never have gotten blossoms off of those. So anyway, along came own root roses. They figured out how to propagate roses other than grafting. And so from cuttings, tissue culture, things such as that, they can get the rose to be propagated, and the entire thing, stems, crown, roots, are all the good part. So in our area, freeze-back is common on roses, but everything that grows from the roots and everything else is that good blooming rose. And so I am going to search for a few more, but I'm going to, in the rose catalogs and when I go to the garden centers, I'm going to make sure it's an own root rose. Now, the grafted roses you can usually identify because they've got a big knob, that's kind of the graft knob between the canes, the branches, and the root system. So usually just by looking at them, you can see. And so I'm going to avoid the grafted roses and go for more own root roses. And how are we doing on your list of resolutions, John?
Well, one of the things that I always mean to do, and I think as long as we've been having the garden, we've been meaning to do it, and Sometimes we've been a little bit more successful about it than others. This is the year I really feel I need to map things out, where I really need to know for purposes of where things are and what they are, just to help me remember the names of different things, but also for planning purposes. So I can look at that, and as the year goes on, I can see that this is where this is, this is where this is. I can map, I can put down, like, when do things come into bloom? What would else be needed there? What else could we cycle in there? What are some good things? And then also look at it for this time next year to maybe say, well, what areas could we change the border on? What areas could we do, and could we restructure a little bit? And I think by having a map there of that would be really, really helpful, and just a good way to kind of stay organized and knowing what you've got, so that when spring comes around, you know what should be coming up there.
You know, another valuable reason for creating a map like that is then you will have on paper identity of the plants.
Yep.
Because when you think about it, okay, putting a tag or a label beside a plant, boy, what if something happens to that label? Yeah. What if it just dries up in the sun and snaps off and blows away? Or maybe you've got something a little more permanent. But what if somebody comes along and what if that label gets pulled out and you can't find it? You've lost the identity of that. And keeping the identity is really important on these things. So I like the idea of having a map where you've identified the different types, and you're not relying just on the label that's by that plant.
And I think also by having a map, I can take a picture of it, or I can have it on my phone. And that way, too, when I'm at a garden center and I feel a really good deal on something, and then I'll have to look and I'll say, do I have room for that? Do I really have room for that? Having that will help me make better decisions and only get what I really, really need.
Good idea.
So
you'll avoid the thing that we've all done is buying something because, it looked so nice, or is on a really good price, and then getting home and wondering, gosh, now where am I going to put this?
Where's it going to go?
Yeah, tear up a little more of the lawn, I guess. So, and another thing on my list is to continue to plant more ornamental grasses, especially some of the native varieties, like big blue stem, native prairie grass and little blue stem. Well, they've come up with some beautiful new cultivars of those. I mean, they're rock hardy, rock solid, but they've come up with some new picturesque varieties on those. So I want to continue adding more ornamental grasses to the collection that I already have, because they are just so beautiful. And in fact, now, we've mentioned the snow and the cold. I enjoy looking at our landscape, and one of the features in the landscape in the winter are the ornamental grasses, the seed heads that they form, and just the structure. In a perennial garden, they really give an awesome structure in the wintertime. I've
got to say, we've got some prairie, I think it's called a flame grass.
They're beautiful.
Yeah, right to the side of the house. And it's we keep it up in the winter. And, this winter, I think it got a little heavy, wet snow, so it kind of folded down. What I've noticed, though, is the way it's kind of folded over, it's left a little opening. So I think that there's a little tunnel almost in there. And I'm sure that there's a rabbit getting in there. And that's fine. In that area of the yard, I've fenced off the things that I don't want rabbits getting into. And those look like those are holding up just fine. So if a rabbit needs to stay warm and we've provided that, then that's okay.
Then that is okay. Now, is that the flame grass that develops kind of the reddish tint to it?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, that is.
And we
awesome.
don't get it.
I need that one.
It doesn't get a probably ideal amount of sun. It could probably, obviously, if it got more sun, the flames the colors rather would be a little bit more intense. But it's very nice. It comes along very nice.
Oh, that's awesome, and I appreciate that you're keeping the bunny there so it doesn't cross the river and head into my yard.
Yeah, I'm sure all the other gardeners in my neighborhood probably are not happy that I've got a rabbit habitat there. All right, let's take a quick little break. When we come back, more with our gardening resolutions.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
All right, we're back, and this week we're talking gardening resolutions for 2026. We've gone over a number of different things. What else is on your list?
Well, I mentioned African violets. I like houseplants, and I am going to visit the locally owned garden centers for a couple of new types of houseplants. Have you seen the selection of houseplants at the local garden centers? I mean, there are types. The plant breeders in houseplants have been just prolific.
Yeah.
There are so many new varieties, new cultivars with different types of leaf shapes, leaf colorations. And so, in the last 6 or 7 years, there are so many things. Now, I know there are some houseplant varieties that command hundreds of dollars because they're quite rare. I may not invest in one of those, but I'm going to get some of the new colored, like in some of the devil's ivy is the common name I use for some of those, but there's so many new colorations of it. And some of the English type ivies have leaf shapes that are so unique. And so I want to buy a few new houseplants like that. And so that's certainly on my list. Another on my wish list. I want to plant another plum tree or two because the winter hardy plums are absolutely wonderful. And when I talk about those, there are names you'll find at local garden centers like Pembina, Juanita, La Crescent, Toca, Pipestone, Superior. And if you tasted your own homegrown plum, you'll never buy another store-bought plum again because they are so sweet and so juicy. And now plum trees are a little bit fussy as to the area in which you plant them. When I planted a few plum trees, maybe about 5 years ago in our new area, I planted them in an area that collects water. They do not like wet feet. Okay. And so I lost about 3 plum trees because when we'd get heavy rains, water would pond for a little bit and they don't like that. So I lost them. So I learned to plant them up a little higher in the yard. No yards in Fargo are high,
right?
But because everything's so flat. But yet most of our lots do have some drainage. So I have learned to plant the plum trees on an area where it at least drains away a little bit and not at the back of our lot where the water tends to puddle a little bit for a day or two. So I want to buy a couple more plum trees, and you do need 2 plum trees for good cross-pollination. And so I want to buy a couple more of those. That's definitely on my to-do resolution list. And, you mentioned a map of your perennials and things and what's in your yard. I want to develop a better labeling system for my perennials. So I did invest in a label maker. And if you choose a label maker with kind of metal stands, there are some label makers now that the labels will stay intact for probably 4 years or so.
Okay.
They're a printed label, black and white, so you can kind of see it good. And gardeners in our area have had pretty good success. 4 years or so is pretty good. But, one little key on that is on the metal labels, and many of the metal labels on which you fasten these printed labels are zinc, and pencil, just plain number 2 pencil, writes quite well on those.
Okay.
And that lasts a long, long, long time. And so on the back side of those, I will write with a pencil what the name is. If it's Campfire Rose, I'll put that in pencil and then put the printed label stuck on the front of that. The way I learned that pencil lasts on zinc. Well, old Professor Neil Holland, we always used pencil because pencil lasts. But on the little side note here, where I gardened on my grandparents' farm, there's one of these old kind of galvanized type threshing machines.
Yep.
Okay, and on the side of that, they used to write how many bushels of grain on what year. And so anyway, I happened to be gardening on there, and I took a little break next to that old threshing machine. Happened to be looking, this was when I was in high school. And I happened to be looking at that, and probably, 70 years after that threshing machine had been pulled off into the woods, there you could still see the pencil on that kind of galvanized tin type thing. So yes, pencil on the right metal, kind of zinc galvanized type stuff lasts a long, long time. So I've learned to, on metal tags, write with pencil.
Okay.
And you can't always see that the best, but it stays. So I'm going to print a nicer label so that I and other visitors to our garden can kind of see the perennials better. Oh, and now here's one on my list that I resolved to do this year, and that's to learn to like Brussels sprouts and kale. Now, Brussels sprouts, I've got to admit, I probably only had them once or so, but anything with butter and a little bit of sea salt
goes a long way.
Goes a long ways. And kale, I've never gotten into kale. But, I like eating healthy, and so I am going to experiment with learning to like and use kale. Are you a kale person?
No, and I will try it again. I've tried it a couple of times, and I've just not. It just it could be a very strong, it's physically strong. It could be a tough thing. Brussels sprouts, I love. I love, awesome. And I think Brussels sprouts, I encourage you, look up some good recipes for Brussels sprouts, cut them and then just put them the cut side down in a pan, let them sear up a little bit.
Can I saute it in butter?
Yeah, butter. They go great with sometimes like a little bit of hot sauce too sometimes, or like a soy or something like that. Really, they're really, really good. Yeah, I think that was
I can get behind that.
Yeah,
I'll
that's
work
what
on
I
the
would,
kale, but yeah, I can. I like things in the cabbage family. I do like.
I gotta say, kale can be a beautiful, beautiful plant. It is a beautiful plant for your yard. My neighbor across the street does a great job growing kale along the walkway, and it's not something I want to eat, but it looks great there.
It looks fantastic. Oh, great! How are we doing on your list?
Well,
I've got one more thing on my list. How are we doing on yours?
One of the things I want to do is you've been doing this for a long time, and since doing the show, talking to you, we've gotten more interested in this. And last year was the first time we really started doing things from seed, and we had some pretty good success. There was a lot of learning things, a lot of things that we won't do again. But I want to do more with seed, and also I want to create an area, because like I said, we don't have necessarily a lot of great natural light for growing things, but in the basement, in a warmer room away from the cat, I want to put kind of a shelving system of a rack, and get some grow lights. And then that way we can do some seeds. And also that way next winter, I can take cuttings of things like coleus and keep those growing kind of all year long, so I can plop them back out into the garden.
Back out again in the springtime.
So that's something for me to do in the cold months inside, but to get to kind of an apparatus, an area, a growing area, so that we can start doing some seeds.
That sounds like a wonderful idea. And you know what the final thing on my resolution list is?
No.
It's going to sound a little funny, but it's to sit a little more often. Because, a person's so busy out in the garden. There's weeds to tackle, there's things to do, there's string beans to pick. And I mean, it's all good. You enjoy that process too. I even enjoy weeding. I enjoy that. But, I'm going to this year resolve to maybe sit a little more. We've got a couple of gardening benches in our landscape and perennial gardens. And usually I just kind of look at those benches. This time I'm actually going to, maybe it'll only be for a few minutes in the evening, but I'm actually going to take time to just sit and soak it all in. And so I'm looking forward. Gosh, that makes me kind of exciting, even though it's really cold outside. I can envision that already. I can envision me sitting out on a bench, surrounded by all the pretty perennials coming up and the trees and shrubs, sending out the new growth in the spring of the year. And so I'm going to make a point of just kind of observing and enjoying a little bit more.
Not that I ever need an additional inclination to sit or an additional push to. One thing I would suggest to go along with that, make yourself a drink from your garden.
Oh,
It doesn't have to be alcoholic, but take some mint. Make a little mint ice in
I love iced tea.
in iced tea or a lemonade. If you've got raspberries, put a little raspberry in lemonade.
Good idea.
Something like that, where you can, because you have something to drink, you'll want to sit down. You won't want to walk
idea.
around with it. It'll kind of maybe help force you to plop yourself down and just sit and savor that
That's
moment.
a wonderful idea. Oh, that's an awesome idea. Well, you see, I'm getting excited for spring and to put some of these into action.
Yeah, this will be great. And like I said, here we are. These are the long days of winter. But thinking about what's coming up and starting to get active in doing things, whether it's planting seeds or ordering seeds, which we're going to do a show on, or doing houseplants, getting more houseplants, which I think we should do in another show on in the new year. All those things will be really great. They'll keep you. They keep your motor running so that when it's time to get out in the yard, you'll be ready to do it.
There's a lot of good things happening in gardening. I can see why it's popular. It continues to be America's #1 pastime. And boy, there's a lot of momentum. I've really noticed that I don't know, probably over the last dozen years, but even in the pandemic and after, there's a lot of momentum. Everything from houseplant to fruit growing to vegetable gardening, landscaping, perennials. There's a lot of momentum going.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun things happening there.
There is.
Well, Don, thanks a lot. It's been really great to talk to you. Again, thanks for another great year. I hope you have a happy holiday.
Thank you, John.
And if people want to reach out to you, if they want to share their New Year's resolutions, or if they have questions about anything that we've talked about in the past or going forward, or if they just want to share their year in review, what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, or maybe even some suggestions for upcoming podcasts.
Yes.
We'd love to hear
Absolutely.
the suggestions too. So send me an email, donald.kinsler, KINZLER, @ndsu.edu.
All right. Well, thank you again for coming by, Don.
Thanks, John. Happy holidays, and thank you, everyone, for listening.